These are two different interactions I haven't thought about in years, but here we go. So, I moved to a quiet neighborhood around 6th grade and it had a very small town feel. It was tucked around at the edge of the city and still had a lot of mom and pop shops. When I moved there, I made friends and was lucky enough to be able to walk around, hang out freely at the playground, and be a kid. I had previously lived near downtown Chicago, so there was no way my parents would let me walk around by myself at 11 to 12 years old. Anyways, after years of hanging at the playgrounds and parks, there were a few tucked around in different areas of the neighborhood. There were a few interactions that left me feeling kinda weird. First, one was a big heavy-set fellow that seemed to be a bit off. He most likely had a mental disability, but he was at the park playing on the playground at night by himself. It was very strange and didn't feel right. He also seemed to want to get closer to our group of friends, but we hightailed it out of there. That one wasn't too bad, although I do wonder why he was by himself. The second interaction was a lot weirder. A couple of friends and I were grabbing some Subway one summer afternoon. By this point, we were in high school but still hung out and would walk around and do whatever. This guy, who couldn't have been older than 25, rode up on his bicycle. He immediately started talking to us and saying that he knew us. None of us knew him, but I did see him riding his bike around earlier that day, by himself, just circling the park. He went to our elementary school and had graduated a while back but remembered all of us. He knew all of our first and last names. Normally, that night might be too odd because I was going to a small school and people knew each other well, but that's what was creepy about this. None of us knew him whatsoever, and he knew all of us. On top of that, I only transferred there in 6th grade, so if he knew my name but I graduated before, that would mean that he was digging around and potentially preying on us. I should mention, he was way too eager to talk to us, came off as a weird recluse with no friends and gave off weird vibes to my friends and I. Unfortunately, I don't remember too much more, but I'm guessing he might have had a thing for younger boys and used the local playground near his house as a scoping ground. He probably was an outcast and took it too far, looking up our info any way he could. Either way, it's goddamn weird, and hopefully we'll never meet any of those creeps again. Unfortunately, this is my second time writing to the sub. I, early 20s, female, have filed a police report and have already told the story to those close to me, but I feel like venting about my piece of crap housemate to you guys would make me feel a little better. Karim is somewhat close to his name, so I'll use that now. I'm not very good at reading people, unlike my landlord. When I first met Karim, he seemed polite enough. He was super tidy, filled the house with amazing smelled cooking, and best of all, he stayed out of my way. I'm kind of a loner and stayed holed up in my room with the company of my gerbils to quietly study and play Minecraft. We didn't cross paths often, and when the school year started in September, he was the replacement for my housemate. It's a 3-bedroom apartment, and I'd been living with another girl, Nelly, for a year already. She was pretty absent from the house as she was almost always at her boyfriend's place, and the third housemate had moved out early. He was honest about some elements of his past that I should have taken as a warning, but took as him being earnest. I had asked him during the mini interview process Nelly and I were holding for potential tenants if he was 420 friendly. He was, but as it turns out, he was a little too friendly. A couple years ago, he'd been arrested for illegal possession of weed and sent back to his home country, Turkey, for a year before being allowed back to Canada to continue his studies. I don't know how this kind of stuff works, to be honest, but that's what he told us. I try not to be a judgmental person, since he made it seem like it was a thing of the past. This is not the case. One of the first things I had noticed in September was that he smoked almost constantly, not to the point of missing classes, but the whole house would stink up multiple times a week in the evening. Normally, I wouldn't mind a bit of smoke, but any stoner will tell you that each strain is different, and for whatever reason, his weed caused really severe panic attacks for me. Around late October, I got sick of his crap and told him to figure out how to contain it to his room. He said that joints are hard to contain and that he needed a bong. I let him borrow my bong. About 2 weeks later, in November, Karim said that he had broken the downstone, but he'd replace it within a few days. He did replace it, but it was the wrong size. Maybe it was a bit pushy of me, but I told him to buy the right size. He refused, said that it was too expensive. I don't know. It's my property. He broke it. He should fix it appropriately, right? Let me know if that request was out of line. However, what was out of line was what happened in mid-February. Around January, my landlord said that we should start looking for new housemates, which was reasonable enough. Not to Karim though. My landlord has always been slow at responding to messages due to the nature of her job, but he absolutely hated her guts for it. He called her every name under the sun behind her back, which made me feel weird because I had been her tenant for 3 years now and we were on good terms. Before I move on to the next part, I'd like to quickly add that at one point during the housing hunting process, he asked me if I would be willing to move out so that his friends could move in, and that it would be super amazing if I did. Obviously, I said no. My landlord later confirmed he had asked her if he could sign the lease behind my back. As I mentioned before, we've forged a good rapport over the last few years, so it was a firm no. Karim got excessively antagonistic about my landlord's deadline. She wanted us to sign the lease, started looking up the law. He said he legally didn't need to give her notice until X date, which was not true. He told me to quietly look for housemates and tell the landlord at the last possible date, which made me super uncomfortable. Since it was around midterms and I was secretly grateful she was pushing for the deadline so strongly, I just wanted it over with. It was shortly after I signed the lease with my new housemates that he showed how truly two-faced he was. I dug through our Facebook messages. The gist of our conversations was this.
Can I use your laundry after I move out? I don't have laundry on site.
No, that's kinda weird.
No, it's not. We'll pay you.
We?
Me and my housemates.
I have never met these housemates before and still have no idea who they are. At this point, I started getting extremely weirded out and said no a few times, but caved and started saying stuff like, I'll think about it to please him. Though I had zero intent of letting him use my stuff, it seemed like the best way to get him off my back. since for a week he'd continuously pressure me and try to get me to say yes. Things hit the first of two crescendos when the day before me and the two new tenants I chose, super awesome dudes by the way, were supposed to sign the new lease. Back to Facebook again, and an approximation of our conversation.
If you don't promise to let me use your laundry next year, I'm going to make a scene in front of your housemates.
A scene?
When they come sign the lease with her, I'm going to tell them how awful our landlord is, that she doesn't care about us and is terrible at replying to our messages. If you let me use your laundry, I'll wait until they leave to tell her to her face.
In other words, he was going to make my new housemates question my judgment and make them think I was a bad person or something. Why else would he go off in front of them and my landlord and tell them she was a horrible and nasty person? He later claimed these messages were a joke, to which I messaged back asking where the punchline was because I didn't see it. I felt like a badass saying that, not gonna lie, especially since he never got around to explaining this supposed joke. At this point, I had a bit of a breakdown. I called my landlord that night when Kareem had left the house for a few hours, letting her know what he was planning to do the next day, even sending her screenies of our Facebook messages, telling her I couldn't let her and my new housemates come over in good conscience. Call me a snitch, I don't care. This guy does martial arts 3 times a week, and despite being shorter than me, he could definitely send me through drywall if he felt like it. I felt threatened and didn't know what he'd do if he found out. I told her, and was the reason signing the lease was rescheduled to a different time and location. She believed me, especially when she read through all the text messages, full context, nothing conveniently cropped. She even saw the parts where I was playing along and calling her a skank too. That's when she told me that she had seen straight through his act while he was signing the lease. Apparently, he spent half an hour reading and rereading our lease, which is abnormal, asking weird questions and being rude to her. After years of being a landlord, she could clearly see that he's the type of overly macho guy that likes to control women, but gave me the benefit of the doubt. Not to get political, but even as an anti-feminist, I'm inclined to agree, especially looking in hindsight at how he's treated the woman, me, the landlord, Nelly, versus the men, Nelly's boyfriend and my male friends in our life. After losing all 4 years of my free time in high school to feminist movement, I'd be able to spot someone blatantly misogynistic as him, and apparently, turns out this special brand of guy isn't a boogeyman after all. At least now I know one when I see one. I signed the lease the next day with my new housemates at a coffee shop, telling Kareem that it was out of the blue that we were signing elsewhere, and I had no idea why we changed plans, and I thought I'd gotten away with telling on him until my landlord sent a letter from her lawyer that very clearly stated that he would not be allowed to demand to use the laundry again, and that if he came back to the house after moving out, it would be considered trespassing. At first, I thought it was an overreaction on her part, but looking back on those messages, I can see why she made that decision. He angrily knocked on my door and shoved the letter in my hands when he got it that day, aggressively and quite frankly, melodramatically saying, "You betrayed me." I crap you not. Those were his exact words. I think he lost his grip on me since he could no longer pressure me, now that the secret was out, which frustrated him. Anyone who's been poorly treated by a misogynist or a misandrist can probably relate to that particular type of control and how it feels to wiggle out of it. Things settled down temporarily. He retaliated in small ways, going out of his way to not sort the recycling in proper bins, not cleaning out the shower drain, putting plastic and metal in the compost bin, and smoking weed excessively. They were small but irritated me. It was the day after he moved out that we reached our second and final crescendo, which led to the police report from the initial paragraph. After months of stuffing a shirt down the crack of my door to keep the weed stank out and generally being freaked out to the point of carrying a small kitchen knife in my pocket whenever I left my room, after the laundry incident, you can bet your ass that I was counting down those last days. He said he left a few things behind from the kitchen. He came along with a friend and tensely but amicably, we sorted out whose Tupperware was whose. On his way out, he spotted my mop and bucket and claimed that it was his and he wanted it back. I'd had this mop and bucket for 2 years. Why the hell was he claiming that it was his? I said no, and he started roaming around the house saying that he wanted his mop and bucket, and if this was mine, his must be elsewhere, which made me uncomfortable, and hell, I diffused the situation by saying that I wanted to use it and would give it back later. I was planning on keeping it. I am under zero obligation to let him back in. Remember the letter that said him coming back in their house after he moves out is trespassing? And he instantly snapped out of it. Later that day, he even said that I could keep it. Why he changed his mind is beyond me. The next day, Karim said that he had left 2 more items behind. I was irritated at this point. I just wanted to be left alone. I said I'd leave it outside. I admit, I definitely shouldn't have done what I did next. I was annoyed and I cringe when I read my own messages, but his reaction was completely out of proportion.
I'll stop by in a few hours. I just got out of the shower.
I'm busy. Can't you come by now? Just throw on some shoes and shorts and a t-shirt. Nobody's outside. By the way, at this point, my town has been in COVID-19 lockdown for 2 months since it's a university town and I live in an area almost exclusively populated by university students. Nearly everyone was gone and it's been a ghost town for weeks. I should also note he had not been taking good social distancing measures whenever he was over and had zero problem getting up and close, even though he had recently been to a much bigger city with a bad outbreak. Just thought I'd point it out.
Fine then, give me my mop and bucket.
You said I could have it.
Give it back.
No. I put the 2 items, a tray and mug, on the porch. A few minutes later, I heard a polite knock. I knew it was him and ignored it. A few seconds later, a ring on the doorbell. Another ring. A louder knock. He kept ringing the doorbell over and over. Exasperated, I opened it and he stood there smiling.
Give me my mop and bucket.
No. I quickly shut the door. Truth be told, I was worried he'd try and stick his foot in the door and tried to stop me from closing it, but he didn't move. He started knocking again and ringing the doorbell repeatedly. At first, it was with some time between, a few seconds, but it grew in frequency and volume. It went from firm knocking to louder, angry knocking. It felt like I was running a marathon. My heart was beating so fast since he straight up started pounding on the door so hard I could see it move, literally, screaming,
Give me my crap.
over and over at the top of his lungs. After about 2 or 3 minutes of him being aggressive and doing this, I can assure you, it felt like hours. He stopped. I heard this weird metallic scraping sound, like metal on concrete, accompanied by a grunt, followed by a loud metallic clang. Silence. I waited for a while. I stealthily looked through windows and didn't see him. I opened the door and to my surprise saw that he had pulled my mailbox off the wall and thrown it onto the path leading to the sidewalk. I kicked myself for not filming the incident, but took my sweet time taking the perfect picture to show that he made some kind of attempt to destroy the property. I mean, not that it can do much. It felt like the right thing to do nonetheless, and I still have it. I ended up putting the mop and bucket outside and telling Karim to come get it and that I just wanted him to leave me alone. I even took out the battery of our door code. Since a part of me is paranoid, he'll try to guess it and break in. He came by and took it and I watched him leave from the window. He hasn't contacted me since. I saw him on the street the other day and he gave me a warm smile as if we were friends, but I looked away and crossed to the other side to avoid him. I filed a police report of the incident the same day as advised by my landlord. She told me during our phone call that he had a documented history of aggression and I'm not shocked. I'm surprised she gave me the benefit of the doubt though and let him sign the lease in the first place. I guess this was a learning experience for all of us. When I asked her of her honest opinion of my new housemates, she said they were trustworthy, and it turns out the guys and I have a mutual buddy, so I'm not scared of them. I told them about the whole incident and they blocked them on Facebook. They were super supportive and glad I filed a police report. They know who he is and won't let him inside. The thing that freaks me out a little is that he moved down the street. I can see his new unit from my window. I can't really say let's not meet again, since we live so close and will inevitably cross paths on the street in the future. But I can confidently and without hesitation say, Karim, get screwed.